Any questions? Anyone, please? Yes, purple shirt in the back.
Could you talk a bit about your tattoos?
I have 16.
Well, like selectively, as you choose.
No, but sometimes I go into a high school and the principals are weird because they're administrators. They're not always teachers anymore, right? And so they're often not as connected to the student body as you might think. Like, they don't necessarily know the kids, even that they're disciplining. They don't know their story. They don't know what's going on. That's not like that in all schools. And there's some fantastic principals out there too. But often I go into the school and I'm there because of some like subversive librarian or like a radical English teacher. Or often what happens is a teacher books me and then goes on mat leave. So she's not even there when I show up, right? And so the principals, may or may not be on board with me being there. And sometimes they come over the intercom and they say things like, "Will the grade 11s please all report immediately to the gymnasium for a lecture?" And I'm always like, I got to see what that guy's driving and let all the air out of his tires on my way back out of here. Thanks a lot. And then it's like 8 o'clock in the morning, 700 kids in a gymnasium, right? And someone will, and see the kids, they get like filed into the gym, and it's like you can see them. They're like, "What is it this time? Drunk driving, crystal meth, teenage pregnancy?" Right? And so I walk in there, and I'm usually wearing a long sleeve shirt. And then if I feel like I need to get their attention, I just pull off my long sleeve shirt, and then they're like, "Hang on a second, what's going on here?" And so it's like my ace in the hole. So I can't reveal my ace in the hole to you at this time. I might need it later next week. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Wendy.
I was actually wondering, because I had this discussion with some of my students last year, whether you think it's actually gotten worse in schools. I mean, my experience in school, I went to 5 different high schools in 5 years, which is never a good thing, right? But I never remember being as intensely bullied as my students' stories of being bullied in this generation seem to be.
I think it's a fantastic question, and I think it's something that we need to all, as educators, think about, because for numerous reasons. One being that when I was in school, no matter how hellish school was, and I went some of the time to Catholic school in the Yukon in the 70s, and then public school in the Yukon, and suffice it to say, some of those teachers were there because they were unemployable in more sort of desirable locales. And no matter how bad it got at school, at 3 o'clock, that was it. As long as you could make it past the bike racks, you were home free. And you got to go home and do your thing, right? It never ends now. It's like cyber texting, cyber bullying, Facebook stuff. There's people send me links all the time to Jeremy is a fag Facebook pages that anyone can start and that get 1,200 likes in the school. Like, that kind of stuff is really rampant, really pervasive, really hard to monitor. And I did a film project called The Love That Won't Shut Up a few years ago. And I went and I interviewed, I work a lot with seniors. It's fantastic work, and it's very rewarding for me. I say I teach memoir, but I don't. I facilitate the process of writing in a room, and I feel very blessed to actually be a part of that. So I did this project where I went and found basically the oldest gay people I could find, and people who were involved in the very early gay rights movement. And one of the things and I asked them all the same series of about 50 or 60 questions. And almost without exception, they said they thought it was better then in lots of ways, because we looked out for each other more. So sometimes I think, I get letters. Remember the one I read to you the other day from this young girl who's read my book, which is fantastic that she managed to get a handle on it, her hands on it. Great. And there's copies of it here. Basically teachers and librarians bugged me for a million years, and they were like, we're photocopying your stories for public schools. Would you please put a collection together that's appropriate for high schools? This story, this story, this story, and this story. Basically, some of your stories all together in one collection without any weed, anal sex, or liquor. And for years I was like, I will not be censored. And then I was like, actually, you're keeping this book out of the hands, because it's very telling to me that I've been all across this country. I've been invited to perform in schools in Europe, and I have never, not once, stepped foot in an American high school, because the religious right is so organized. But my book is selling like hotcakes down there, and it's already got starred reviews from the American Library Association, so it's making its way in there, even if I can't, right? Even though, ironically, when I do go into a public school, unless asked, my show there's not a queer thing about it except for me, right? So the answer is a little bit yes, a little bit no. Like this, I got this email a couple of days ago from this young girl, virulently evangelical Christian family, and was about to come out to her family and thanking me, right? And I'm just terrified. I'm terrified. And that's the other thing. As teachers and as teacher candidates, I'd like you to consider the following. Most of the time, not all the time, a kid goes to school who's black and gets bullied and is subjected to racism. They go home, and at least one of their parents is going to have that same experience and be able to speak to that. Right? Same thing for fill in the blank for, if you're a recent immigrant, a student, then you're going to go home and your family's going to be able to support you and understand to some degree. For kids who are from certain kinds of families, super evangelical Christian families, or other religions that really teach hatred and bigotry towards gay and lesbians, school is the safest place that they have. They're not safe at home at all. They are not safe. The school that I went, where Georgia was, when I went there, there was a 14-year-old girl who told me that she tried to come out to her father, and he stopped her halfway through and said, if you're about to tell me what I think you're about to tell me, I'm going to have to stop you right now because you're my daughter, and I would hate to have to kick you out of my house. So consider the statistics on gay and lesbian youth and homelessness. There's a huge proportion of homeless youth are gay and lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered. That's one of the reasons they have been kicked out of their home by their parents. By their parents. So even though night school can be a nightmare for some kids, and it is, and let's face it, who had a fantastic experience in school? Please hold your hand up, please. Seriously?
Grade for you is fantastic.
No, but I have asked 700 people that in an auditorium, and had 2 people put their hands up. What are we doing wrong? Seriously, we cannot figure this out? That there's not 10% of us go, yeah, school was fantastic. It's where we go to get an education. Like, we seriously need to address, this is some systematically fucked up stuff we're talking about here. If there's no one in this room can say, I had a fantastic time in school, I really looked forward to being there, it was a great learning experience, I'd love to go back, right? None of us can say, almost none of us can say that. What is wrong? And so I really worry sometimes. I worry because kids are coming out of the closet earlier and earlier and earlier. There are more gay characters in popular culture. We have Lady Gaga, for But sometimes I wonder if we're not there with the infrastructure, if we do not have the school administration on our side, if there isn't a safe place, if we're not addressing those issues, are we not allowing them to paint a target on their back and walk out into that hallway? That's what I wonder sometimes. And I'm not going to say, oh, no, don't come out of the closet. That's not the answer. But I really feel like we have to address these issues and we have to address them sooner and sooner and sooner. We have 2 little friends who are little baby tomboys, 7 and 8 now. Both of them have experienced the bathroom problem. One of them came home one day and she'd peed her pants because she was yelled at in the girls' washroom and then told by the teacher she was not permitted to go into the boys' washroom. So she tried to hold her urine for an entire school day and peed her pants. And guess what? Remember the kid who peed his pants in kindergarten? He's still the kid who peed his pants in grade 7. People don't forget that stuff. Then you get great. You're the guy who peed his pants, right? And that killed me. And it's like, seriously, somewhere in this building is a bathroom that without too much investment can be made into a gender neutral bathroom, right? It's called a public washroom. Look up the word public. It's called public school.
Was the grade 1 gender based bullying was so bad she had to change schools.
Yep.
That's how severe it was.
These are kids who are 6 and 7 and 8 years old, and they've still got 12 more years of school ahead of them, right? And then there was Kate dropped out of science camp in the summer because it wasn't a safe place for her to go. So, these are real barriers to kids accessing things that we take for granted should be accessible to all of our children, right? And I say this like, I got asked one time to do a gig in Surrey at a public school by the woman who then went on maternity leave, which has happened to me 3 times now, right? And I show up and I'm like, at least I have Catherine. Oh, no, you don't have Catherine. And Surrey is a city outside of Vancouver. It's pretty famous for being kind of in the Bible Belt. Not too long ago, they actually had like a book burning, and they banned the Harry Potter book series from the public high schools for promoting witchcraft, and which of course it does. And so I got asked to go to this school. It was a huge school. It was like 1,800 kids, right? And about 2 days before I was supposed to go there, bing, I get an email, and it's the principal. Now it's actually on his desk that I'm coming in. And they brought it up in a staff meeting who was going to bring their classes to this thing. And again, might I state again, it's not like I go in there and talk about like, and here's how you... I'm not even going to go there. Okay, so I'm talking about anti-bullying. It's just me. That's the problem, right? And so he said, could you please send me a copy of all the text you're going to read, and I will photocopy it and pass it around to the entire faculty, and then we'll decide if it's going to be okay for you to come in. And I said, are you doing, because this is Arts Enhanced Week, and I happen to know, because I helped Catherine, book a whole bunch of artists from all different kinds of mediums, a videographer, a cello player, all these different artists. Are they all going through this? Have you contacted Richard Van Camp, the storyteller? Because he's foul-mouthed, and he has this one story about, anyway, and so, and he hadn't. None of the other artists had been subjected to that kind of scrutiny. So I said, no, I'm not going to, absolutely will I not send in my unpublished, uncopywritten material to be photocopied and passed around and voted on. Either you want me to come out to your school and address bullying issues, or you don't, and let me know. And so he's, well, rah, rah, rah. And so I go out there. He actually was quite gracious. There was 900 kids. Everybody had a fantastic time. And then he was a little bit embarrassed about his behavior afterwards, because I said to him, like, I'm not going to use any foul language. There's no sexuality. There's no sexual content whatsoever. In fact, I'm telling us one of my stories is about my grandmother, about my 90-year-old grandmother, right? I'm actually not there to promote any homosexual agenda. I'm there as an artist. I'm there primarily as an entertainer, actually. And, unless there's a law about looking gay in your school, Is there a law, sir, about looking gay in your school? Because if I put a dress on, I actually just look like a drag queen. So that's going to be a problem. He's like, well, of course there's no law. And so afterwards I wrote him and I said, you have 1,800 students. And he had said that there was 4 Jehovah's Witness families that might, this was preemptive. This was fear-based. It hadn't even happened yet. He wasn't dealing with a situation that had happened. He was dealing with a situation that he was worried was going to happen. And I said, so 4 families, and you're going to, because 1,800 students, we're talking about 180 kids. 180 kids. That is a conservative statistic, that 10% of those kids are going to grow up to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or intersex. And so you will, basically what you're telling me is you are going to ignore the needs of 180 kids, the right now actual needs of 180 kids to see some reflection of themselves, some healthy, positive reflection of themselves in your school programming, for the possible negative response from 4 of your students. 4 of your students. If 10% of your school were in wheelchairs, you would have wheelchair ramps. It would be not questioned that that was necessary. If 10% of your student population was First Nations, he said, well, it is. We're bordering on a reserve. I said, great. Is that reflected in your... And he said, absolutely, we have it in the curriculum, we have First Nations studies, we have First Nations faculty. I said, fantastic. So what are you going to tell the 180 kids that are queer? Sorry? Hope you make it through? Best of luck? I don't have your back? So, ask yourself if it's important. Remember, when that kid comes knocking on your door, when you're in your 2nd year of teaching, remember that might be the only, you might be the only safe harbor for them. No big deal, no pressure. You know, just don't fuck it up. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so on that note, coming out is one thing you can do, and you can run GSAs and you can invite people to come speak. What else can teachers do to make life safer?
I don't know, we got lots of teachers here. What do you guys think? I'm not a teacher. I don't know. I mean, I have ideas. I have my own ideas. I think the gender-neutral bathrooms are a huge thing. For me, that would help. Wendy, what do you think?
I'm just going to add that Weston is about to announce that almost all of the single-store bathrooms on the campus have been designated gender-neutral.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There will be a map out on the university website very soon as to where to find it.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some buildings like education that don't seem to have any single-store washrooms. And so, at least in the census they did over the summer trying to find them, they couldn't find some in some buildings at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are other issues around segregation and things like that, but it's a step in the right direction.
I think just including it in part of every curriculum. Like, quit teaching Michelangelo and leaving out the part about the sonnets were mostly for boys. I mean, that's who he was writing them for. Not Michelangelo, sorry. Shakespeare. And talk about the statue of David in your sculpture class, in your art history, that's what I was going to say. Talk about why he, you know what I mean? Like, quit teaching queer art and queer history and leaving out the queer part. Like, it's offensive to me. And I don't offend very easily, but it's like, quit whitewashing us all the time. We're all over everything, right? It's true, we're a creative people. We can't help it. And so, you know, and I mean, some of it's so no-brainer to me, but people just have these huge reactions. When you're talking about families, include all kinds of families. Like, duh, you know? And it doesn't have to be like, don't keep queer studies to sex ed. Like, include it in everything, just like the assumption is that, you know, we assume everyone's heterosexual all the time. Quit making that assumption and just bring it up in all kinds of ways, wherever it's relevant, right? Because it's relevant all over the place. Queer people don't always just sit in a room having sex with each other. Like, Well, yeah. No, but I mean, like, you know, there's all, and it really is. It's a part of philosophy. I mean, let's just quit removing us from the story all the time in the curriculum, right? And if you're talking about, you know, and think about your language all the time, like, you know, and quit constantly gendering everything. Like, I just remember how I was tormented by swimming lessons because it was always like, boys on the left, girls on the right, boys on the left, girls on the right. Why? Why do they have to do that, right? And, yeah, I don't know. I could go on about this. Well, I don't know. What else do the teachers think? I want to hear from teacher candidates. Like, what are you guys planning on doing? How are you going to address it? You know? Is it being addressed in your curriculum right now? I guess it is to a degree because I'm here, right? So, yes. The back with the scarf.
I'm in my first year of teaching in a small town not far from Woodstock, Ontario. Lots of Mennonite families, very religious families, a lot of people know each other, and I teach French. So we talk about history, we talk about art, we talk about English, how to bring it into the curriculum. How do I do it in French? I really struggle with it, and I have 2 applied classes, so I can't really have them read anything in French because they don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
On one of the first days, I did include with language on their talk about me form, because it had mom, dad, sister, and brother. So I put up on the board.
This is what I'm talking about. This assumption that everyone's heterosexuality.
Brother,
Yeah.
stepsister.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of the kids used it. Why wasn't it on the form already? And I think that I'm just going to have to get over the fact that I'm leaving the curriculum and get away from the pressure to stick to curriculum and maybe show a video in English. Maybe show a Dan Savage video. I've got grade 9s in Elmer, Ontario, have never heard of Dan Savage before.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fantastic idea.
And I'm
Like
looking
all,
for more suggestions.
be conscious of those things. Like for instance, I remember Father's Day being really traumatic for my younger cousins who were all children whose dads had bailed on them, right? And so it's like, that's an opportunity to talk about alternative family structures and to not just meet the needs of the kids who have 2 moms or 2 dads, but to talk to speak to the kids whose parents are divorced, who have single parents, single moms or single dads. Like there's all these different avenues when you're looking for them, right? Yeah, question at the back there.
No, I was just going to make a comment. Working with children in the past, especially young children, I found myself in situations where kids would talk amongst themselves and say, "Oh no, that's a boy's toy. That's a girl's toy," or "No, that color's only for girls and boys." And I always say, "No, that color can be worn by both girls and boys." And it's interesting because children come into the education system in kindergarten, grade 1. It's a lot of firsts for them. So they're coming from the home to where they only get one idea to a place where they're getting exposed to a multitude of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as teachers, that's our opportunity to kind of break what they think is the only way and say, no, you can play with that too. Anybody can play with it.
Or even just ask them why. Why do you think that?
Yeah,
Like-
challenge that.
Why do you think that boys can't do this? Or why do you think girls can't be astronauts? Or, I mean, because it's still, you know, and I know it's an issue. I don't mean to make light of it. I was in Saskatchewan doing a thing with teacher candidates, and I had a woman just say, like, I can't talk, because everybody approaches it in terms of sexuality all the time, and I think it has way more to do with gender roles, especially the younger kids. We're not talking about sexuality of a kid who's 5 years old and he wants to wear a dress from the tickle trunk in the classroom. That's not sexuality. That's gender identity. That's a different thing. They're intertwined, there's intersections, there's, you know, but they're not interchangeable. They're not interchangeable terms. They don't mean the same thing at all, right? And so I was saying, you know, we talk about gender roles, talk about that little girls can be anything that they want to be when they grow up. And this one woman put up her hand, and she was just about to retire from teaching after many, many years in Saskatchewan. And she said, you have no idea what it's like out there. She's like, I teach kindergarten, I can't read books about dinosaurs because half of their parents are creationists. I can't read books about dinosaurs, much less have a discussion with my kindergarten kids about gender roles. She's like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And so I said to her, so is that what we teach the 20-year-old teacher candidates then? To lay down already? Give up already? Not push the envelope? You know, not just assume that it's the, you know, operate from a really fear-based kind of set of motivations about how we're going to teach, or are we going to teach them to be brave? Are we going to teach them to stand up? Are we going to teach them to take some chances and to you know, and to be leaders and role models? Or are we just going to go, okay, well, you know, that's never going to work. Let's not even try. You know, but I don't want to completely gloss over the fact of how strong the reaction can be too, right? You know, I mean, it's scary, I think, especially when you're first new in your job, right? And you got to toe the line a little bit.
But that's also the place where I think it's important to look for mentors, right? And to speak to those who come before you, to talk to colleagues who are teaching, especially in a French context, to see who the other social justice educators are, right? Because, I mean, I think this is the opportunity for having conversations like this to be able to build on those who've come before. I mean, just like you've talked about, being a mentor, being a role model, just as the importance of having to seek those people out in your life. I think that applies to anyone, and particularly in a professional experience like the one you're talking about.
Yes.
Maybe another way to think about it too is framing it in a sense of building classroom context. And I think as educators, we're often very good at doing that at the beginning of the school year. But classroom context and culture is something that needs to be built and nurtured throughout the year. And too often we think it's something that we do right when students get back from summer vacation, and then we don't pick it up again at all. And so I think that's something that we can build and reinforce. And one of the things that we can do as educators is, you know, create anonymous systems in our classroom for reporting and encourage on an ongoing basis formative feedback from students, and get feedback about your teaching, and get feedback about what's happening in the halls, and get feedback what's happening in these schools. And, you know, if you don't have the textbooks that have the most up-to-date use of gender terminology, then talk to the kids about what's missing in this text. You know, because we can't, as new teachers, ask for a brand new set of science, you know, curriculum materials. But what we can do is talk about, why aren't there women scientists represented here? Like, what, and, you know, what happened?
Why is everybody white in all the pictures?
Exactly. So, I mean, we can bring that critical lens to our classrooms and to our discussions, and we can do it from so many different ways that it doesn't have to be about gender or race or sex. It just becomes a lens through which we question, which somehow gets the conversation at least started.
I also think it's a really valuable thing to teach a kid. Just because it says it in a book doesn't mean that that's the one way to look at it. That's the first and last word on it. And that the person who wrote that book, even if it's a history book, was not biased and didn't bring their own experiences into anything. I mean, is that not what we're supposed to do, partly as educators, is teach kids critical thinking? Teach them to question things. Teach them to ask questions. Teach them to wonder about these things. And that make space for that too. You know, don't shut them down. And yeah. Any other questions or comments? Caitlin.
I was curious to know if you've ever been in a school where the tribes program has been implemented.
Tribes program? What is that
It's a resource that some schools have adopted to help make a more inclusive environment.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was going to be framed around that as to whether there was less bullying or whether you had noticed a difference if you had that experience.
I don't know. It's the first time I've ever even heard the term. So maybe you could speak to the room and tell us what that means. Are you learning about this?
It's a certification you can get. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that this year it will be offered as was last year. The teacher
Does it stand for something like?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
My dissertation research is on tribes, actually. And,
So what's it stand for?
well, it actually doesn't stand for anything. So it's an unfortunate name for a program that was designed to reduce violence and foster inclusion in schools.
Mm-hmm.
It's a program that was designed as an evidence-based program in the 70s, and it has been disseminated widely across North America. In fact, some school boards in Ontario, they actually require their teachers to have the certification before they can get hired by the board. Our London board is not one of those boards, but it is fairly widely used in London, and I know it is offered here at the faculty. And it's a program that basically takes the classroom through a process to build community and cooperative learning structures. And then as a teacher, you can decide how far into that kind of a program you want to move, and if you want to pick and choose strategies from it. So I did a district-wide evaluation of the use of it here in Thames Valley, and the schools that we studied, when it was implemented as a school-wide strategy, there was a lot of bullying reduction. Because along with that comes attitudes about inclusion and fostering community, all those sorts of good things.
Mm-hmm.
But even as an individual teacher, it has positive impact in the classroom. So it's definitely something for new teachers.
And the cultural appropriation base title is, yeah. That's interesting. My first question is, how do you measure bullying? Like I want to see the statistics on that. I'd love to know, because I've found in my experience, again, limited and only in very short spurts in any one school, but the schools that I go into where bullying is the biggest problem are the ones where the kids are clammed up. They do not talk about it. Why? Because they're in a culture. They're living in a climate of fear. They don't feel like they can talk to anyone about it because it's that pervasive. So I would be really interested in finding out how we would measure something like bullying in a school, or how we're collecting that data. What that looks like, and because I think it's something that's really intangible and hard to sort of quantify.
And sometimes we worry that just by going in and trying to measure it, we actually raise awareness of what it is, and in some ways may perpetuate it. I mean, it's a subjective sort of process.
Yeah.
Or rather, inexact science.
Yeah. Anybody else, please? Yes, Mark.
I'm curious to know to what degree diversity within, when you've traveled to all these different schools across the country, you must have experienced schools where diversity is not a feature and where diversity is. My own two daughters go to schools in Toronto which are incredibly diverse. And I'm not going to suggest that there's no bullying, but it doesn't seem to be a huge issue for them. And I'm wondering whether part of this is education, part of it is also environment, in the sense that what we need to do is somehow, and I don't know how you do this, but make our schools more evidently diverse, so that we don't have invisible victims, and so that there is a sense that the environment that you're in is one where there is difference, and where difference is allowable because it's part of it.
I've seen the demographic really change. Like, you would think, okay, maybe in a smaller town, things are going to, but I see that changing really quickly. Like, I remember looking around when I went to Saskatchewan, when I was in Saskatoon, and then I was in Moose Jaw, and seeing a vastly different audience than I might have expected. So, and like I said, I'm not on the ground in the schools enough to really give you any kind of an educated comment on that. I'm also not a parent myself, right? So I don't know. I know even up in the Yukon, like I was back in Whitehorse for the Young Authors Conference last year, and it was definitely not the cultural demographic that I remember there being when I went to school there. And I mean, of course, that was like 5,000 years ago. But I think it's changing really quickly. So I don't know that I can actually answer that question for you, because I get so just these quick flashes, and they're often I can tell right away, sort of the class background is much more telling to me than actually sort of the levels of racism or anything. Those things are more apparent. And that sometimes for me is more important as a storyteller, what elements to bring out. Like, my story is we're all white trash, blue collar kids. And so that's just inherent to the story, but I can draw out certain parts of that, right? So for me as a storyteller going in, I'm more interested in sort of the economic status of the kids than the sort of racial diversity or whatever. That's more relevant to me getting in there and doing my job. I remember being in Whistler, which is a really, really rich area code, and I was actually teaching a writing workshop, not doing a storytelling thing. And so I was getting them to do this, bring the 5 senses into your writing. And I said, we're going to pick a place in the school, and this kid puts up his hand and said, the cafeteria. I said, great. What does a cafeteria smell like? He said, sushi. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I was expecting hot dogs, right? And because that's what they're serving at school in East Vancouver, watered down craft dinner and hot dogs, just like when I was going to school, but not in Whistler. And so, you know, yeah, I find more class being an issue than seeing. But I don't, like I said, I'm not there. I don't collect that data. I don't know. I just get a sense of a place. I can see how old the school is, maybe what their budget is, you know, like that. But yeah.
But sexuality is part of diversity as well. Mm-hmm. The issue, I guess, to sort of reframe it a little bit, it's about invisibility versus visibility.
Right.
In the sense that
yeah.
That there's difference among us, that we don't have to hide difference, and that we're not going to pretend that there isn't difference.
Mm-hmm.
So the very fact that you are there as somebody who is different, who's announcing the difference, mm-hmm.
Must in itself be a value. Would you encourage? I mean, it's a stupid question because I don't think you can answer it. But
they say there are no stupid questions. I don't actually believe that, but no, go ahead. No, but I mean, again, it's like then we get into conversations about, can I tell someone's queer by looking at them? Yes, I can for me, but then that invisibilizes a whole other element, a whole other huge part of the queer community, right? And then it also like self-enforces some kind of like queer uniform or queer aesthetic on us all that, that also I find is problematic and just doesn't reflect the community, right? And I think there's lots of different ways to be queer in many different cultures, and so I also hesitate to just be able to walk into a school and go, that teacher's obviously, I mean, the gym teacher you always wonder about, but they just might be like a farm girl, you know what I mean? And or they just might really like sports. And I'm kind of being a bit facetious, but do you know what I mean? Like it's hard to just know the real story, just walking in like I do and then walking out, right? Often I get information later from emails from teachers or from students, but I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question, Mark. Yeah. Okay, all right, good. Yes?
The story you told tonight that most troubled me was your story of Newfoundland and being shut out of the number of schools. Schools reproduce themselves. They're institutions, and that's the nature of institutions, is they reproduce themselves, and they reproduce themselves over time. And part of it is our new teacher candidates that come in are not as diverse as our population. And renegades and revolutionaries don't tend to go into teaching. So over periods of time, the schools don't change as much as society changes, in a sense. They're kind of bastions of conservatism. So you have used the conversion model in talking tonight, about converting people, and that kind of message that you take up. It's kind of like old-time religion in a sense. It's your version of old-time religion. But it sounds to me like it's the teachers and the principals that need to hear your stories as much as the students do. So what's your thinking on that? How can you bring your stories to the teachers and the principals?
Well, many of these people will one day go on to be the teachers and the principals.
I don't want to take air out of your tires, but the system...
No, I hear what you're saying.
The system, I'm afraid, is going to suck them in and chew them up.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, folks.
Not to be a total downer, but...
It's a real tough system to resist.
Mm-hmm.
And as a sidebar, I like the idea that we should all be coming out and be role models, but teachers are not safe in the system.
I realize that. I realize that. I just think that to walk into the situation having already given up, or have and I can't force school administrators, but teachers can force the kids into the gymnasium. And to be honest with you, I never ever dreamt of doing this. I'm an artist. I'm a storyteller. Honestly, I like theaters with better seats and better lighting. No offense, Vince. I'm sorry. It's the fluorescence. I got to think. I'm an artist. I only do this because I think it's necessary. I don't, you know, and I don't have all the answers. I just do what I can do the way that I can do it. I think storytelling is the most powerful tool that we have. I think listening to each other is a revolutionary act. And I never set out to be this person. I wasn't like, wow, I think I want to be a writer and go into public high schools at 8 o'clock in the morning with a crappy, you know, cordless mic and a terrible sound system and no acoustics and perform stories terrified to 700 kids who are forced to be there.
And that, half asleep.
And that are half asleep. And the rest of them are texting. That was never my big dream growing up. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, I do it because it's necessary, and I do it because I see results, and I hear from people that it's effective, and that it does make people think. And, you know, so I don't know how to speak to school administrators, but it's starting to happen. Often the ones who really don't want me there show up so they can get evidence of why I shouldn't be there, right? That happens. I've also had like janitors come up in tears and cry and thank me and hug me for being there, like in their blue coveralls, because they were in that school. They've been working in that school for 30 years, getting trashed by the kids. And so I guess I can't talk myself out of doing this, or come up with all the reasons why it's not enough, or it's not going to work, or so-and-so's going to say it's not going to happen. Like, I just can't. That's not my way to get up every morning and do. I just do what I can do. And then I hopefully encourage teachers, teacher candidates to at least think about it, at least address it when they can. And I'm never going to stand up here and say that I have all the answers. I don't. I think it's huge. It's systemic. It's, you know, and I'm still, after doing this for 15 years, I still ask the same question. Who had a great school experience? Nobody puts their hand up, right? But to me, that's a reason to keep going, to keep doing it. It's not a reason to say, you know, well, I'm not talking to the school administrators, or, you know, we're just going to recreate the same system over and over again, because I think the room's more diverse than it was. The fact that I'm here in the first place is a change that might not have been there 10 years ago. And that's all I can do. I can only do what I can do, right?
Artists are revolutionaries.
I think teachers can be too. I'll tell you something. I like to lift weights, play music, and write. And the 3 best teachers I ever had was a gym teacher in grade 8, my grade 8, grade 9, grade 10 band teacher, and Ted Garland, my English teacher in grade 9. Affected my life for the rest of my life. So I think teaching is a revolutionary act. I think it has a potential to change things in really fundamental ways for kids. Ask that one right there how important her good teachers were.
Oh God, I'm gonna start crying.
She grew up on Thunder Bay, on welfare in Thunder Bay.
Yeah.
Daughter of a single mom, PhD, Dr. Sharman.
Well,
That's my wife.
You know, and I got a full scholarship to Western.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so emotional.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I was like, don't read this piece, I'm going to cry all the way through, and I held it together. So halfway through high school, I realized that the only way I could get out of Northern Ontario was to bust my ass and get a scholarship, a full scholarship. And I got a full ride to Western, President's Entrance Scholarship. And it was the biggest class shock I had ever experienced in my entire life. I panicked my way right into a sorority, which is hilarious for anyone who knows me now. That ended. I later found campus radio, and that made much more sense to me. But I mean, school was my ladder out, and it was my ladder up. I have a very atypical class story because of where I sit now economically. And that was absolutely about access to education, and it was about amazing teachers. I was emailing today with one of my undergrad teachers, who I haven't seen in about 10 years, because I want to go back and see him. Tim Blackmore, from the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. You know, from first year of my undergrad right on through to fourth year. They are those people who were the powerful educators who transformed my educational experience and who continue to do that in different ways, right through to the PhD. And so, I mean, I absolutely echo what Ivan says, and I think that it's why we both do what we do. I mean, I work in gender and health research at the federal level. That for me is a radical act of social justice.
I call her a radicrat.
I mean, I get that it grinds you down, but you can't give up. Why give up? Why let those fuckers win? Really?
Yeah.
Like, I will be in that stupid boardroom in my high-heeled boots every day.
Let's go home right now.
Right? You know, standing up for my people,
Yep.
just like you do.
I think teaching is a radical act. In some ways it's probably, and I think it's really hard too, you know. And I think about what I get paid to do a 45-minute show and what I get paid to teach a 3-hour class, and the discrepancy there. And I have a lot of respect for teachers, and I really do, at all levels. And I think, like I said, it's really important to remember that as shitty as high school was for some of us, for some kids it's the only place that they have access to other possibilities, other ways of looking at the world, other opinions, and to not belittle that and not let it grind you down too much, you know. I think it's a fantastic thing to be a teacher, and it holds a huge potential for social change. And I don't think we should forget that. I'm not saying that there's not problems, obviously, but yeah.